Hi everyone, I've come across this story today, which is about a couple who adopted two black daughters. They actually adopted multiple children, and one of them was beaten to death, and another child was hospitalised and almost died. So I'm just going to play this a short section from this.
This is where the family used to live. The children's sandbox is still here. So is their slide. And their treehouse. But the surviving children are now in foster homes, and the parents are in prison.
Violated Section 273A, parentheses B.
They pleaded guilty to killing Lydia and seriously injuring her 11-year-old sister, Zariah, who almost died. Authorities say Kevin and Elizabeth Schatz beat their children regularly because they believed God wanted them to. The district attorney says the Schatz believed
to spare the rod will spoil the child, and if you can train your horse and you can train your dog, you can train your children.
7-year-old Lydia suffered terribly, supposedly in the name of God. But authorities say this was torture and murder by parents who were supposed to love and cherish their child. Inside this house, they found important evidence. The so-called biblical rods the Schatz had inside. What they were 15-inch long plumbing supply tubes used to beat the children. And also important, a book was found inside. A book that appeared to light the fuse to the deadly brutality. The book is called To Train Up a Child. Its author is this man on the tractor, Michael Pearl, and his wife Debbie. They consider themselves observant Christians who run an organization called No Greater Joy Ministries from their Tennessee farm.
Well, I'm a preacher, minister of the gospel.
Their book and others they've written stacked in a warehouse on their farm. All of them guided, they say, by the teachings in the Bible.
And it says that if you spare the rod, you hate your child. But if you love him, you chasten him timely.
Right. Well, first of all, I'd like to ask the question, would America tolerate a book titled How to Sexually Abuse Your Child? You know, and that is basically what their book, To Train Up a Child, is advocating. How to abuse a child. Okay? Now, what's most disgusting about this is that the whole thing of, spare the rod and ruin the child is a misinterpretation in the way it's being applied. Because the rod is the symbol for universal law of abundance and compassion. Okay? And if that law is spared, if it's not being applied, the children are ruined. And that's why we're living in this horrible world today that's being governed and controlled by lawless people. Because the law has been spared and the children have grown up ruined. Now, the thing about God is that we're required as intelligent beings to live by new knowledge. That's why we have a brain. That's why we have intelligence to learn to live by new knowledge. Okay? It's no good having intelligence, learning things, and then totally ignoring them and living by a few words that were written a couple of thousand years ago, a few thousand years ago. Things have changed since then, and we know very well that harming children, hurting them, ruins them. That's a fact. So let's get past this idea of, spare the rod and ruin the child means we've got to regularly beat children with a rod. That is not what it means. That's a total misinterpretation. Okay? It's the same kind of people that support this idea. You'll never see them standing up for their rights, for our human rights. You'll never see them teaching universal law of abundance and compassion. These are the kind of people you see standing outside abortion clinics. berating the women, mostly impoverished women, who can't afford to have a baby. So, you know, it's actually money, the lawless world, that is forcing these abortions. But you'll never hear them complaining about that. They won't stand up, you know, and demand that TEPCO, for example, gets beaten, will you? Where's the rod for TEPCO that's, you know, destroyed, is right now with their Fukushima horror, caused by their own negligence, okay, destroying the Pacific Ocean and half of Japan, polluting half of the Japanese people, and most of the, you know, all the rest of the world with all the nuclear fissioning products that are floating around now. Where's the rod for them? Oh, but we can beat our children, can't we? Naughty child needs beating with a stick. No. The whole point of universal law is to protect the child from people who would harm them. That's the point of the law. You know, and it does say in Revelations that the man-child will come and he will rule the earth with an iron rod. And I really hope that this man-child does arrive and to rule the earth with an iron rod. And the iron rod, it's not there for beating people with. It's there to inhibit and arrest the people who would hurt children. Okay? It's to stop children from being harmed, so they're not ruined, so they grow up into proper, caring, considerate, respectful, compassionate human beings who live with dignity. You know, and what's most abominable of all is that this book, To Train Up a Child, and this horror being inflicted on children in the name of God, is from a country that's just elected this guy, President Donald Trump, okay, into office, into the White House. This is the man who, you know, has openly admitted, confessed, and even bragged, you know, and it's the bragging. If he confessed and apologised, it's a different thing altogether. I believe in forgiveness. But this man is unrepentant. He unrepentantly bragged about sexually assaulting women. And he's now president of a country where a large portion of the people, and especially a lot of them who support him as well, advocate battering children, beating them with rods. And one little girl we know of now has died because of that. And another one has been hospitalised. And how many others? How many children for thousands of years have been so abused by the misinterpretation of God's word? Okay, because the word, the rod, equals law. And where is the law? Where is the law that upholds our human rights? It's virtually non-existent. You know, people begrudge human rights. The corporations want to destroy them. In Britain, our government's hoping to scrap them. That's what they've said. They want to scrap human rights and replace them with a Bill of Rights, which we already know is going to equate to no money, no rights. And the very fact that this money system, the present economic system, is controlling our world and is causing so many problems is because it's a lawless money supply. It's managed and created by lawless people, the kind of people that want to harm children. And I mean, I'm just lost for words. I can't. It's so upsetting to read this, to, you know, to see what is being done in the name of God and to little children. And then you've got nations, you know, and groups and organisations, various ones, claiming that they're working for God, and, you know, they're killing people, they're torturing people, they're punishing people, they're judging people, harming people, you know, as if God is there. God is a figure that, you know, is so terrible and terrifying. Why? Because they are terrified of God, obviously, and that's why they're inflicting terror on even little children, to the extent that they killed a child. And, you know, this child's death is on their conscience now. It has to be. And, you know, I feel sorry for them, because I know that a lot of these people, even though they're so abominable in their interpretations and their absolute refusal to live by new knowledge, okay, they want to live in the past. You know, it's sad that they think they love God so much, but in fact they are upsetting God. They upset God with their horrible applications and misinterpretations of, you know, intelligent advice. Because the advice is, if your societies are not run lawfully, your children will be ruined. Okay? So, uphold the law in your whole society before you start beating your children. And in fact, beating a child is forbidden. It's forbidden to harm a child. And, you know, like I say, where is the punishment for somebody like Donald Trump? I'm not saying that he should be hit with a stick either. You know, this kind of physical punishment, hurting people, it is not part of God's law. The whole point of God's law is to stop that kind of abuse, to stop abuse of children, to protect children, to uphold children's rights. So, my heart goes out to the children and, you know, that poor child who died. This book, To Train Up a Child, that needs to be banned. It needs to be banned. It's a book advocating child abuse of children. And the Christians of America, you really, really need to lighten up and get with new knowledge. And when you apply the new knowledge, you shine it on the biblical text. That's when the true way forward shines out. That's when we become illuminated with the new knowledge. Because books like the Bible, which are a reflection of our social and spiritual and psychological history, they are confused through time, and people have misinterpreted them. And, you know, they think, like that couple, that the way to raise a child is to regularly beat it with a stick. You know, they're actually turning people against God by what they're doing to children. It actually turns children against God. It makes them hate God. Okay? So they're doing the very opposite of what they say they believe in. Or is it just that these people really are sadists and they enjoy hurting children and they delight at the chance to hurt a child because it says this in the Bible? Is that it? We just don't know, but, you know, there's a lot of nasty judgments and horrible, sickening ideas coming from these people who claim to be Christians. Okay, and it does make you wonder, are they really sadists who have found that they can hide behind Christianity and commit all kinds of do all kinds of horrible things, hurt children in the name of God? Is that what it's really about? It's like these ISIS people, you know, who we know are part trained up by the CIA, funded and armed. Okay, and you know they claim to be serving God, but wherever they go, you know, they're raping women. They're getting married to 8-year-old girls. You know, what is it all about, really? They're hanging and torturing teenagers for playing football or listening to some rock music. That's the kind of things ISIS is doing. That's why Muslims are fleeing from them. They're hurting Muslims. And why? They say they're doing it in the name of God. But really, are they just paedophiles and sadists who delight at a chance to, you know, unleash their horror on innocent people? Because they can say, we're working in the name of God, when in fact, they're just evil. And that is exactly what's happened here with their book, which claims to be training up a child for God by hurting the child. I mean, it has to be stopped. We have to understand the truth. We need to accept reality, and we need to live with new knowledge, because there's no point in having a brain, there's no point in being an intelligent species if we're not going to live by what we've learned. And we've learned that in a lawless world, every kind of horror imaginable can happen, because there's no law. And the whole point of the law, which is symbolised by the iron rod, is to protect life and protect the child from harm and abuse, to raise a child with dignity and respect, with compassion, with care, with consideration, with intelligence, with up-to-date knowledge. So, I mean, I am so disgusted and so upset. It's so difficult to live in this world. It is so difficult to live in this world. And it's just the hope that intelligence, you know, the true golden light will shine through, and people will start to put their faith in that, you know, instead of physical gold, which is just really a useless lump of metal. If people put as much faith and love and investment into, you know, developing and establishing universal law of abundance and compassion, then our world would be such a better place for everybody. You know, we could heal our planet. But no, instead, you know, people want to beat the children with sticks. And in a world where a corporation is right now destroying our Pacific Ocean, and yet children are being, you know, punished for little things. They're being punished in such a terrible way, and this child has died, and it's one child too many. If just one child dies through being punished, it's one child too many. But we know that there's millions of children who are suffering every kind of abuse. And it's time to put our foot down, to draw the line and say no, and to establish proper child protection directives. As everybody knows who's seen my other videos, I advocate EU child protection directives for every child on earth. And as I say, until those are established, no amount of charities or writing books and talking about child abuse is going to stop it from happening. We need to stop it. Okay? That's not to say that, you know, there are never going to be any criminals. There's always going to be deranged people that want to hurt children, and that's why the law is there. To protect. That's why we need it. And the children need it. The children do not need to be beaten with a rod. That is not the interpretation. The correct interpretation: spare the law, ruin the child. So, live in a lawful society. And America is not a lawful society. It's living way, way beyond and outside of the realms of universal law of abundance and compassion. It is actually thriving on austerity, as all the banking system in this world is thriving on austerity. It's the very opposite. And that same banking system wants to dump an unrepayable debt on the next generation. A debt that's been accumulated through every type of crime imaginable. And they're expecting our children and their children and their children's children to repay that debt forever. Well, you know, we can tolerate that. These people, so-called Christians, can tolerate that. But, you know, a child being naughty, you better beat it with a stick. Beat that child with a stick. You know, you are all so wrong. So wrong. And it is disgusting that this level of backwardness is still continuing today, and that a book like that that's advocating abusing a child, it really, really needs to be banned, you know. And I'm sorry to all those Christians. Well, I'm not sorry, actually, if I've offended you, because I tell you now, you are offending me. I find you offensive in your backward ideas, and, you know, as I say, God is very forgiving to people who repent and lighten up, you know, lighten up Christianity and lighten up world. It's time to get real, and it is time to protect the children. And thank you for listening, and God bless.